Your body is trying to warn you right now, not with pain, not with obvious symptoms that send you rushing to the emergency room, but with subtle signals that something is going wrong with how your cells use sugar for energy, and most people ignore these signals completely until the day they're diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, at which point the disease has already been developing for 10 or even 15 years. Here's what makes this so dangerous. Type 2 diabetes doesn't just appear one day out of nowhere. It develops gradually through a process that starts with insulin resistance, progresses to prediabetes, and eventually crosses the threshold into full diabetes. During this entire progression, which can take a decade or more, your body is sending warning signals. Your blood sugar is slowly rising. Your pancreas is working harder and harder to keep that sugar under control. And damage is accumulating in your blood vessels, nerves, kidneys, and eyes long before you get the actual diagnosis. By the time most people are diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, they already have complications. About 50% of newly diagnosed diabetics already have some degree of nerve damage, eye damage, or kidney damage at the time of diagnosis. That damage happened during the years when their blood sugar was slowly rising, but still below the diagnostic threshold. They thought they were fine because they hadn't been diagnosed yet, but their body was being damaged the entire time. This is why recognizing the early warning signs is so critical. Type 2 diabetes is completely preventable and even reversible in its early stages. If you catch it when you're still pre-diabetic or in the early stages of insulin resistance, you can reverse the entire process through dietary and lifestyle changes. You can restore normal blood sugar control without medication and avoid all the complications that diabetes causes. But if you wait until you're symptomatic and the diagnosis is obvious, reversing it becomes much harder. And if you wait until complications have developed, some of that damage is permanent. What we need to understand is what your body looks like and feels like in those early stages before diabetes is obvious. What are the subtle signs that your metabolism is breaking down? What symptoms indicate that your blood sugar is already higher than it should be, even though it's not high enough yet for a diagnosis? And most importantly, what do you do when you recognize these signs in yourself? Hi, I'm Dr. Alex. I'm an emergency medicine doctor, and after nearly 10 years in the AANDE, I've seen what diabetes does to people when it's left uncontrolled for years. Amputations from infected diabetic foot ulcers, blindness from diabetic retinopathy, kidney failure requiring dialysis 3 times a week for the rest of someone's life, heart attacks and strokes in people who thought their diabetes was being managed with medication. The complications are devastating, and they're largely preventable if the disease is caught and addressed early. My goal now is to help people recognize the warning signs of diabetes before it's too late to prevent it. Because type 2 diabetes is not an inevitable consequence of aging or genetics. It's a metabolic disease driven by diet and lifestyle that can be prevented and even reversed if you catch it early enough. For the next few minutes, we're going to talk about 5 early warning signs that your blood sugar is already too high and you're on the path toward diabetes. These aren't the classic symptoms like extreme thirst and frequent urination that appear when diabetes is advanced. These are the subtle early indicators that appear years before diagnosis, and if you recognize any of these signs in yourself, you need to take them seriously and get tested, because catching this early is the difference between reversing the disease and managing complications for the rest of your life. The first warning sign is persistent hunger and intense cravings for carbohydrates, particularly for sugar and starchy foods, even after you've just eaten. This is one of the earliest and most consistent signs of developing insulin resistance, which is the first stage on the road to type 2 diabetes. Here's what's happening. In a healthy metabolic state, when you eat food, your blood sugar rises. Your pancreas releases insulin to shuttle that glucose into your cells where it's used for energy. The glucose is cleared from your bloodstream within a couple of hours, insulin falls back to baseline, and you feel satisfied until your next meal. Your hunger and satiety signals work properly, you eat when you're truly hungry, and you feel full when you've eaten enough. But when you're developing insulin resistance, your cells stop responding to insulin properly. Your pancreas releases insulin, but your cells don't open up to let the glucose in efficiently. So your pancreas has to pump out more and more insulin to achieve the same effect. You end up with high insulin levels trying to force glucose into resistant cells. The problem is that high insulin blocks fat burning and promotes fat storage, and it also interferes with leptin, which is your satiety hormone that tells your brain when you've had enough food. When insulin is chronically elevated and leptin signaling is impaired, your brain never receives the message that you've eaten enough. You feel hungry even though you've just consumed adequate calories. And specifically, you crave carbohydrates because your cells are being starved of glucose even though your blood is full of it. This creates a vicious cycle. You eat carbohydrates to satisfy the craving. Your blood sugar spikes, your insulin spikes even higher to compensate for the resistance. You get a brief feeling of satisfaction, and then an hour or two later, your blood sugar crashes because all that insulin finally did its job too well. Now you're actually hypoglycemic, and you're intensely hungry again, craving more carbohydrates to bring your blood sugar back up. You're on a blood sugar roller coaster that repeats multiple times throughout the day. If you find yourself constantly thinking about food, needing snacks between meals, craving sweets or starchy foods in the afternoon, or feeling shaky and irritable if you go more than a few hours without eating, these are signs that your blood sugar regulation is already impaired. Your body is trying to tell you that insulin resistance has developed and you're heading toward diabetes, even if your fasting glucose test still comes back normal. The longer this pattern continues, the worse the insulin resistance becomes. Your pancreas has to work harder and harder. Eventually, after years of overwork, your pancreas starts to fail. It can't produce enough insulin anymore to overcome the resistance, and that's when your blood sugar starts to rise permanently and you get diagnosed with diabetes. But the hunger and cravings were warning you years before that happened. The second warning sign is persistent fatigue that doesn't improve with rest, and particularly fatigue that gets worse after eating, especially after meals containing carbohydrates. This is another direct consequence of insulin resistance and impaired glucose metabolism. In a healthy person, eating food provides energy. Glucose enters your cells efficiently, your mitochondria convert it to ATP, and you feel energized after a meal. But when you're insulin resistant, glucose can't enter your cells efficiently even though your bloodstream is full of it. Your cells are being starved of their primary fuel source. They're surrounded by energy they can't access. The result is that you feel tired all the time because your cells are energy depleted. The fatigue is particularly noticeable after meals because that's when your blood sugar spikes highest. You eat a carbohydrate-rich meal, your blood sugar shoots up, your pancreas dumps out a massive amount of insulin to try to force that glucose into resistant cells. You get a brief period where some glucose finally makes it into cells, and you might feel okay. But then the insulin overshoots, your blood sugar crashes, and you feel absolutely exhausted. You might even feel like you need to take a nap after lunch because the blood sugar crash is so severe. Many people in this situation think they just need more sleep at night or better time management during the day. They blame their fatigue on being busy or stressed or getting older. But the real problem is that their metabolism is broken. Their cells aren't getting the fuel they need because insulin resistance is blocking glucose entry. And no amount of rest will fix that until the insulin resistance is addressed. Studies have shown that people with prediabetes and early diabetes report significantly more fatigue than people with normal blood sugar control, even when controlling for age, body weight, and sleep quality. The fatigue is metabolic. It's a direct result of cells being energy starved despite adequate food intake. And it's one of the earliest signs that something is wrong with blood sugar regulation. If you're constantly tired, especially if you feel worse after eating carbohydrates, if you need caffeine to function throughout the day, or if you feel like you could fall asleep at your desk in the afternoon, don't dismiss it as just being tired. Get your blood sugar tested, check your fasting glucose, your hemoglobin A1C, and critically, get your fasting insulin tested. Because fatigue combined with insulin resistance is a clear warning that diabetes is developing. The third warning sign is increased thirst and more frequent urination, particularly at night. Now, these are also symptoms of advanced diabetes, but they actually start appearing much earlier than most people realize. They begin when your blood sugar is mildly elevated, but not yet high enough for a diabetes diagnosis. Here's the mechanism. Your kidneys filter your blood constantly, and they're supposed to reabsorb glucose back into your bloodstream rather than letting it spill into your urine. But the kidneys can only reabsorb glucose up to a certain threshold, typically around 180 milligrams per deciliter. When your blood sugar rises above that threshold, glucose starts appearing in your urine. Glucose in your urine creates an osmotic effect. It pulls water into your urine through osmosis, increasing urine volume. You have to urinate more frequently because your kidneys are producing more urine to flush out the excess glucose. And because you're losing more water through urination, you become dehydrated and you feel thirsty all the time. Now, in advanced diabetes, where blood sugar is 250 or 300 or even higher, this becomes very obvious. People are drinking massive amounts of water and urinating constantly. But in the early stages, when blood sugar is only mildly elevated, maybe 140 or 160 after meals, the symptoms are much more subtle. You might just notice that you're waking up once or twice during the night to urinate when you never used to, or you're drinking a bit more water than usual, or you need to use the bathroom more frequently during the day. Most people dismiss these symptoms as just drinking too much water before bed, or having a small bladder, or getting older, but they're actually early indicators that blood sugar is elevated enough to cause glucose spillage in the urine. Your kidneys are trying to protect you by flushing out excess sugar, and the thirst and frequent urination are the side effects of that process. If you've noticed that you're urinating more frequently than you used to, especially at night, or if you're constantly thirsty even though you're drinking plenty of water, don't ignore it. These symptoms mean your blood sugar is already elevated to the point where it's exceeding your kidney threshold. You're not just pre-diabetic at that point, you may already have diabetes but haven't been diagnosed yet. Okay, if you're watching this video because you're worried about diabetes or because you've noticed some of these symptoms in yourself, I want you to know that recognizing these warning signs early is one of the smartest things you can do for your health. Type 2 diabetes is preventable and reversible in its early stages, but only if you catch it before significant damage has occurred. I promise to keep giving you the real science behind these conditions, so you can take action before it's too late. And all I ask is that you hit that subscribe button to help this channel reach more people who need this information. If you make it to the end and you don't feel like you learned something important, you can unsubscribe. But if this information is helping you recognize warning signs you might have been ignoring, then stick around and help me spread this message. Hit that subscribe button now, and let's continue with the final 2 warning signs. The 4th warning sign is wounds that heal slowly, cuts that seem to take forever to close, and frequent infections, particularly yeast infections, urinary tract infections, and skin infections. This is a direct consequence of elevated blood sugar impairing your immune system and damaging your circulation. High blood sugar interferes with your immune system function in several ways. First, elevated glucose impairs the function of white blood cells called neutrophils, which are your first line of defense against bacterial infections. When blood sugar is high, neutrophils can't move efficiently toward infection sites. They can't engulf bacteria effectively, and they can't kill pathogens as well as they should. Your immune system is essentially handicapped by the elevated sugar. Second, high blood sugar provides an excellent food source for bacteria and fungi. Yeast in particular thrives in high glucose environments. This is why diabetics and pre-diabetics are so susceptible to yeast infections. Women may notice recurrent vaginal yeast infections. Both men and women may develop oral thrush or fungal skin infections. The elevated glucose in bodily fluids is literally feeding the organisms that cause these infections. Third, elevated blood sugar damages small blood vessels, particularly the capillaries that deliver blood to your skin, extremities, and mucous membranes. When circulation is impaired, wounds don't get adequate blood flow to heal properly. Oxygen and nutrients can't reach the wound site efficiently. Immune cells can't get there to fight infection, and waste products can't be removed. The result is that even minor cuts, scrapes, or blisters take weeks to heal instead of days. If you've noticed that cuts on your hands or feet seem to heal much more slowly than they used to, or if you're getting frequent infections that never seem to fully clear up, or if you're dealing with recurring yeast infections or urinary tract infections, these are signs that your blood sugar is already high enough to impair immune function and circulation. This doesn't happen with normal blood sugar. It's a clear indicator of metabolic dysfunction. Many people, especially women dealing with recurrent yeast infections, treat the symptom without addressing the underlying cause. They use antifungal medications over and over, but the infections keep coming back because the high blood sugar is still feeding the yeast. The only way to permanently resolve the problem is to bring blood sugar back down to normal levels through dietary and lifestyle changes. The fifth and final warning sign is tingling, numbness, burning sensations, or pain in your hands and feet, particularly at night. This is called peripheral neuropathy, and it's caused by damage to the small nerves in your extremities from chronic exposure to elevated blood sugar. High blood sugar is toxic to nerve tissue. When glucose molecules attach to proteins in your nerves through a process called glycation, they impair nerve function and eventually cause nerve death. The longest nerves in your body, which run from your spine all the way down to your toes, are the most vulnerable because glucose has the longest distance to travel and the most opportunity to cause damage. The early symptoms of diabetic neuropathy are often described as tingling, pins and needles, burning sensations, or numbness, particularly in the feet and toes. Some people describe it as feeling like they're walking on pebbles or like their feet are wrapped in thick socks. Others experience shooting pains or electrical sensations. The symptoms are typically worse at night when you're lying still and paying more attention to what you're feeling. Here's what makes this particularly concerning. By the time you're experiencing neuropathy symptoms, you've already had elevated blood sugar for years. Nerve damage doesn't happen overnight. It develops gradually from chronic exposure to high glucose. If you're already feeling tingling and numbness, you're not in the early stages of metabolic dysfunction anymore. You're well down the path toward diabetes, and damage has already occurred. The good news is that early-stage neuropathy can sometimes be reversed if blood sugar is brought back to normal levels quickly. The nerves can regenerate and repair to some extent if they're not exposed to high glucose anymore. But if the damage continues for too long, it becomes permanent. And advanced diabetic neuropathy leads to loss of sensation in the feet, which dramatically increases the risk of foot ulcers and amputations because people can't feel injuries when they occur. If you're experiencing any unusual sensations in your hands or feet, tingling, numbness, burning, or pain that you can't explain with an obvious injury, you need to get your blood sugar tested immediately. Don't wait for it to get worse. Neuropathy is a sign that nerve damage is already happening, and the only way to prevent it from progressing is to normalize your blood sugar as quickly as possible. So if you've recognized one or more of these warning signs in yourself, what should you do? The first step is to get proper testing. Don't wait for your annual physical, make an appointment specifically to get blood sugar testing done. And don't just get a fasting glucose test, because that can be normal even when you're already pre-diabetic. Get a hemoglobin A1C test, which measures your average blood sugar over the past 3 months. This gives a much more complete picture than a single fasting glucose measurement. An A1C between 5.7 and 6.4% indicates prediabetes. An A1C of 6.5% or higher indicates diabetes. But even if your A1C is between 5.3 and 5.6, which is technically normal, you should pay attention. That's the grey zone where metabolic dysfunction is developing. Get your fasting insulin tested as well. This is the test most doctors don't order, but it's one of the most important. Fasting insulin tells you whether you're developing insulin resistance years before your glucose becomes abnormal. Optimal fasting insulin is under 5. If it's above 10, you have significant insulin resistance and need to address it immediately. Once you have your test results, the next step is addressing the root cause. And the root cause of type 2 diabetes is not genetics or bad luck. It's chronic overconsumption of processed carbohydrates and sugar combined with a sedentary lifestyle. Those factors drive insulin resistance, which progresses to prediabetes, which progresses to diabetes. And the only way to reverse that progression is to eliminate the dietary factors that caused it. First, eliminate processed carbohydrates and sugar completely. Bread, pasta, rice, crackers, cereals, sweetened beverages, fruit juice, desserts. These foods spike your blood sugar and insulin repeatedly throughout the day, driving insulin resistance. Replace them with vegetables, which provide nutrients and fiber without the glucose spike. Second, eat adequate protein at every meal. Protein stabilizes blood sugar and prevents the spikes and crashes that drive hunger and cravings. It also preserves muscle mass, which is critical for maintaining insulin sensitivity. Third, don't fear healthy fats. Fat doesn't spike blood sugar or insulin. Healthy fats from meat, fish, eggs, nuts, avocados, olive oil, and butter are satiating and provide steady energy without the metabolic disruption of carbohydrates. Fourth, implement time-restricted eating. Instead of eating constantly throughout the day, compress your eating into an 8 to 10 hour window. This gives your body extended periods where insulin can fall to baseline and insulin sensitivity can improve. Fifth, exercise regularly, particularly resistance training. Muscle is the primary site of glucose disposal. When you build muscle and keep it active, you improve insulin sensitivity dramatically. You don't need to run marathons. Resistance training 2 to 3 times per week, combined with daily walking, is highly effective. Sixth, prioritize sleep. 7 to 8 hours of quality sleep every night is essential for blood sugar regulation. Sleep deprivation causes insulin resistance and impairs glucose metabolism. And seventh, manage stress. Chronic stress raises cortisol, which drives insulin resistance and raises blood sugar. Meditation, deep breathing, time in nature, strong social connections. These aren't optional extras. They're essential for metabolic health. Here's what you need to understand. Type 2 diabetes doesn't appear suddenly out of nowhere. It develops over a decade or more through a predictable progression from insulin resistance to prediabetes to full diabetes. And your body sends warning signals throughout that entire process. Constant hunger and carbohydrate cravings, persistent fatigue, especially after meals, increased thirst and frequent urination, slow wound healing and frequent infections, tingling or numbness in your hands and feet. These symptoms are your body's way of telling you that blood sugar regulation is breaking down. Most people ignore these signs or attribute them to other causes. They're just tired or stressed or getting older. But these symptoms indicate metabolic dysfunction that's silently damaging your blood vessels, nerves, kidneys, and eyes. And if you wait until the damage is obvious, reversing it becomes much harder or impossible. The good news is that type 2 diabetes is completely preventable and even reversible in its early stages. If you catch it when you're pre-diabetic or in the early stages of diabetes, you can restore normal blood sugar control through diet and lifestyle changes. You can avoid all the complications, you can get off medications if you're already taking them, but you have to recognize the warning signs and take action before it's too late. If you've recognized any of these 5 warning signs in yourself, don't wait. Get tested, get your fasting glucose, hemoglobin A1C, and fasting insulin measured. And if any of those numbers are abnormal or even borderline, take it seriously. This is your chance to reverse the disease before complications develop. This is your opportunity to add healthy years to your life instead of spending decades managing diabetes and its complications. If this video helped you recognize warning signs you might have been ignoring, and if you now understand how critical early detection is for preventing diabetes, please hit that subscribe button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Type 2 diabetes is an epidemic, but it's preventable. Help me spread this message so more people can catch it early when it's still reversible. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.